For 8 years the girl touched her ear, while her father, a mafia boss who ruled Chicago's underworld with blood and silence, spent millions flying across the world, dragging his daughter from hospital to hospital, threatening every specialist to look again, to try harder to find something everyone else had missed. But they all said the same thing: nothing we can do. Congenital, irreversible, accept it. And Vincent Castellano, the man who could make an entire city kneel, had to accept that his money and power meant nothing against his daughter's silence. Until one cold October morning, a woman who had buried her own child 3 years ago and had nothing left to lose, walked through the gates of his mansion, and she noticed something no one else did, and what she found inside that little girl's ear will leave you speechless. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Drop a like to let us know you felt something real today. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that ordinary people can create extraordinary miracles. Vincent Castellano, they called him the Silent King because he never needed to raise his voice, never needed to threaten anyone with words. A single nod, a single look, the smallest motion of his hand was enough to decide the fate of anyone bold enough to stand in front of him. At 37, he held the entire Chicago underworld in his grasp, an empire built on blood and silence, where every dark road led back to one name. Gambling, loan sharking, protection, rackets, transportation. It all ran through his hands like rivers pouring into the sea, and he sat there at the center of everything, steering every wave without lifting a finger. Other crews did not dare to breathe too hard when they heard his name. They understood that one small mistake, one wrong glance was enough for them to vanish from this earth before anyone could even ask why. The Chicago police took their monthly envelopes the way other men took their paychecks. They knew who truly ran this city, and they knew it was smarter not to ask questions. Politicians lowered their heads when he walked into a room, not because they respected him, but because they were afraid of that gaze, cold as ice, afraid of power that never needed to show off, but could crush anyone in an instant. Vincent Castellano was not only wealthy, he was dangerous in a way money could not buy, a kind of power born of blood and fear, fed year after year by the brutal lessons he taught to anyone who dared to challenge him. The Castellano estate sat on 50 acres in Lake Forest, the richest suburb in Illinois, the kind of place where America's richest built their castles to separate themselves from the outside world. From a distance, it looked like a dream, with Georgian stone columns reaching high windows, glittering under the sun flower beds, trimmed to perfection down to every centimeter, and a marble fountain standing at the heart of the grounds surrounded by ancient oaks that had lived through 3 generations. Anyone who looked at it would think this was paradise. But inside the mansion was an entirely different world. Silence. Not the gentle silence of a happy home, but a heavy silence, thick and dense, as if something had died here, and no one had managed to bury it yet. 20 bodyguards patrolled the property guns hidden beneath their suit jackets, eyes sweeping every shadowed corner, moving like shades, not talking, not laughing, never looking at anyone for too long, and especially never looking their boss in the eye. There was no music in this mansion, no television noise, no laughter echoing through the walls, only the soft tread of footsteps on marble floors, the steady tick of a clock in a long corridor that seemed to stretch forever, and now and then the sigh of a man sitting alone in the dark. The servants moved like ghosts. They came, they worked, they disappeared. No one asked questions, no one was curious, no one dared, because they all knew the story about the young girl last year, the girl who tried to start a conversation with the boss's daughter. She vanished after 3 days. No one knew where she went, and no one dared to ask. So they learned to lower their eyes, learn to be silent, learn to become invisible inside the very house they served. And Vincent wanted it that way. He built this empire on fear, and he kept it alive with fear. But every night when the mansion sank into darkness and the servants had retreated to their rooms, Vincent sat alone in his study, not to work but to look at her. On the wall across from him hung an oil portrait in a gold-gilded wooden frame. Catalina, his wife, the woman with hair black as silk and blue eyes warm as honey in sunlight in the painting. She was smiling the smile Vincent had loved from the first glance, the smile he would never see in real life again. Catalina had been gone for 8 years, taken on the very night Sophia was born, and Vincent remembered every second of that night, as if it had happened yesterday, her moans in the delivery room, the sharp stink of disinfectant, the cold white lights pouring down over his wife's pale face, everything going well, the doctor saying it was a normal birth, the nurse saying the baby was healthy, and then the blood began to flow, and it would not stop. Vincent stood there gripping Catalina's hand, watching doctors rush back and forth in panic, hearing shouting the alarms of machines, someone calling for more help, and yet he could do nothing, the man who could make a whole city. Neil stood there helpless as his wife slipped out of his hands. Catalina looked at him, those blue eyes that had once burned like fire, now fading, her lips moving, trying to say something. Vincent bent down, pressed his ear to her mouth, trying to hear, but no sound came, only a weak breath against his skin. Only lips trying to shape words she would never have time to speak. And then the light in her eyes went out completely. Her hand fell limp, and Vincent Castellano, the infamous Mafia boss, cried like a child. Sophia had the same blue eyes as her mother, and that was the reason Vincent could not bear to look at his daughter, because every time he looked into those eyes, he saw Catalina again. He saw that fatal night again. He saw lips moving without words, and he could not endure that pain. But behind a closed door, the most powerful boss in Chicago was dying a little more each night. And he did not know that the one who would save his daughter was standing at the estate gates with $47 in her pocket. October in Chicago cut straight to the bone, the sky a dull gray, like a lead blanket, pressing down on the city. Not a single thread of sunlight able to break through, and the wind off Lake Michigan came in hard gusts, carrying dampness and the smell of rain about to fall. Grace Sullivan stood before the 3-meter-tall iron gates of the Castellano estate, both hands clenched around the straps of her battered old handbag, trying to keep her breathing from trembling. She had been standing there for 10 minutes, and still she had not dared to press the bell. In the pocket of her thin coat, the coat she had bought at a thrift shop for $5, and that was not warm enough for a Chicago winter. She had exactly $47. That was everything she had left in this life. $47 that could not cover this month's rent, could not buy her mother's medicine, could not do anything except stretch out A few more days of slow grinding survival. Grace looked down at her shoes. The soles worn flat, a small tear at the toe that she had tried to patch with glue. The second-hand coat, unable to stop the cold that was slipping into her skin and threading itself through her flesh. And her hands began to shake, not only from the cold, but from fear. She knew whose house this was in all of Chicago. Who did not know the name Castellano people, whispered it in dark alleys. They told stories about those who dared to offend him and vanished without a trace. They said that working for Vincent Castellano meant you were either paid handsomely or you were never seen again. And Grace had heard the rumor about the missing girl. The girl who had tried to get close to the boss's daughter and disappeared after 3 days. No one knew where she went, and no one dared to ask. 3 years earlier, on a night when rain came down in sheets, Grace had had everything: a husband, a child, a life, and then in a single moment it was all taken away. She still remembered every second of that night. Heavy drops of rain lashing the windshield, the wipers screeching. Without pause, her in the back seat, with Ethan held tight in her arms. Her son, only 4, wearing the blue shirt he loved most, his hair neatly tied back. Ethan dozing off his head, resting against his mother's chest, his breathing steady and warm. And Grace kissed the top of his head, breathed in the sweet scent of children's shampoo, the last peaceful moment of her life. Derek sat behind the wheel, eyes bloodshot, breath thick with whiskey he had been drinking through the entire party, even though Grace had begged him to stop. "I can drive. Let me drive, Derek. I'm begging you," Grace had said. But Derek brushed her off the way he always did. That male pride, never yielding, never admitting he was wrong, never letting his wife do anything that might make him look weak. "I can drive." "Sit still," he snarled, and Grace wanted to argue back, wanted to snatch the keys, wanted to call a cab, but she was afraid she knew what would happen. If she made Derek angry, the bruises on her arms had not even healed from the last time. The car tore through the rain, Derek doing 70 miles an hour on the slick road. Grace stared at the speedometer, her heart skittering out of control. Derek slowed down. "Please, shut up," he shouted. Up ahead, the traffic light turned red. Grace saw it clearly, the hard red glare cutting through the rain. Derek, red light. Stop. But Derek did not stop. Maybe he did not see it. Maybe he saw it and did not care. Maybe his alcohol-soaked brain could not react in time. The car ran the red light, and then Grace saw it, an 18-wheeler, charging in from the right headlight's blinding horn. Screaming she only had time to crush Ethan to her chest, to use her whole body as a shield. And then the world exploded. Metal slammed with a sound that tore the night open, glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. The car spun, flipped, rolled, who knew how many times? Grace thrown around like a rag doll in a washing machine. She did not know what was up and what was down. She only knew she was holding Ethan, holding him so tight, her arm bones felt like they might break. Then everything stopped. Silence, only the patter of rain and the sound of blood dripping somewhere. Grace did not know how long she had been unconscious, maybe a few seconds, maybe a few minutes. When she opened her eyes, the world reeled. She lay in the wreckage of the car, broken glass cutting into her skin, blood soaking her face, but she felt no pain. She felt nothing at all, because Ethan was still in her arms, motionless. Ethan, baby Grace, shook him, no response. She shook him harder. "Ethan, wake up, my love." Ethan opened his eyes, only a sliver those clear blue eyes Grace loved more than her own life looking at her. But something was wrong. The light in them was fading. "Mom." Ethan's voice was weak, only a breath. "It hurts." "It hurts." Her son said he hurt. Grace wanted to scream, to call an ambulance, to do anything to save him, but she could not move. She could only hold Ethan cry and watch the light in her son's eyes slowly go out. "No, no, no. Stay with me. Ethan, look at me. Look at me, my love." But Ethan did not look any more. The boy's eyes closed. His tiny hand, that had been gripping his mother's shirt, fell limp, and Grace felt her soul fracture into a million pieces. Derek stood by the roadside without a scratch, without a drop of blood, staring at her with empty eyes, not even sober yet. After that night, Derek felt no regret. Instead, he blamed Grace. "If you hadn't distracted me, if you hadn't kept nagging, I would have seen the red light. It's your fault. It's all your fault." And when Grace tried to explain, Derek's answer was a slap, hard enough to knock her to the floor. The beatings became more frequent, Derek pouring all his guilt into his wife's body, and Grace endured it because the part of her that could feel pain had died with Ethan. 6 months later, she filed for divorce. Derek took everything: the house, the car, the bank account. His lawyer was better, more expensive. And Grace walked out of the courthouse with a suitcase of clothes and a few $100s. She went back to live with her mother, Margaret. And then fate delivered another blow. Her mother was diagnosed with end-stage pancreatic cancer, metastasized, inoperable. The doctor said at most a year. Hospital bills of $3,000 a month. Grace did every job she could, waitressing, washing dishes, cleaning, but it was never enough. The bills piled up, 1 month late, 2 months late, 3 months late. They had sent a warning letter. If payment was not made within 2 weeks, Margaret would be transferred to a public facility, the place people called the waiting room for death, where the elderly were packed in like objects, where no one bothered to remember your name. Grace could not let that happen. Margaret had raised her, had stood beside her in her darkest days. She deserved to leave this world with dignity, not in a cold room with strangers who could not even be bothered to look at her face. And so Grace stood here at the gate of a mafia boss with $47 in her pocket and a broken heart in her chest. She pressed the bell, not because she wanted to work here, not because she thought it was a good opportunity. She pressed it because this was the last choice. Either she found enough money to save her mother, or she died at the hands of the mafia, and either way, she had nothing left to lose. The iron gate began to swing open, and Grace Sullivan walked into the tiger's den. The front doors of the mansion were already open when Grace reached them, and a woman was standing there waiting. Mrs. Helena Cross, 58 years old, her silver hair pulled tight into a flawless bun with not a single strand out of place, her back straight as a ruler, as if she had swallowed an iron rod and lodged it inside her body. She wore black from head to toe, not a wrinkle in the fabric, not a speck of dust clinging anywhere, and her face was cold as stone, as if she had forgotten how to smile decades ago. But what made Grace shiver was her eyes, gray as steel, sharp as a blade, sweeping over Grace from head to toe in exactly 1 second, measuring, analyzing, judging, as if she could see everything about Grace. In a single glance, the thrift store coat, the worn-down shoes, the trembling hands, and the desperation burning behind her eyes. "You are Elena Carter," she said, not a question, but a statement, her voice dry and icy without a trace of feeling. "Yes, ma'am," Grace answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Follow me." Mrs. Cross turned and walked away without waiting, and Grace hurried after her. They crossed a grand foyer with a soaring ceiling and a crystal chandelier, glittering overhead, beautiful, extravagant, and yet so cold it seemed to ache in the bones. Mrs. Cross stopped in the middle of a corridor and turned back to face Grace. "Before you start working, there are a few rules you need to remember," she said, her tone as flat as someone reading a death sentence. Rule 1. You clean, you stay silent, you never look Mr. Castellano in the eye. Never. Grace nodded. Rule 2. You do not speak to his daughter. Never. Not a word, not a gesture. You act as if that child does not exist. Do you understand? Grace hesitated for the length of a heartbeat. A daughter she had not known the Mafia boss had a child, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Cross stepped closer, lowering her voice into a threatening whisper. "The girl who worked here before you thought she could be friendly with the child. She thought she could help. She thought she was special." Mrs. Cross paused, those gray eyes drilling straight through Grace. She disappeared after 3 days. No one knows where she went. Grace's throat turned bitter and dry. She swallowed hard. "I understand, ma'am." "Good." Mrs. Cross gave a single nod. "You will stay in the servants' quarters in the basement. You start work at 5 in the morning. You finish at 9 at night. You get 30 minutes for lunch and 30 minutes for dinner. Pay is at the end of the month 3 times the normal rate. Any questions?" Grace shook her head. She did not dare ask anything. "Good, follow me." And as Grace followed Mrs. Cross deeper into the mansion, she began to understand. The pay 3 times higher was not for the work, it was for silence. It was for fear, it was for becoming invisible inside the very house she served. She nodded, accepted the small room in the basement, and began to work. And in those first days, Grace learned how to become a ghost head bowed silent, unseen. But there was another ghost in this mansion, a child the whole world had forgotten. A week passed, and Grace had learned how to become invisible. She woke at 4:30 in the morning, before the sun even thought of rising, put on the simple black uniform Mrs. Cross had issued, tied her hair neatly back, and began work at exactly 5 as required. Mopping the floors came first every day. Hundreds of square meters of marble that had to be polished until it could serve as a mirror. Grace dropped to her knees, dipped her rag into the bucket, and wiped each tile one by one. Her knees aching her back, worn down to the bone, but she did not stop. She was not allowed to stop. She kept her head lowered the way Mrs. Cross had instructed, did not look at anyone, did not speak to anyone, did not exist. And then one morning, as Grace was wiping the corridor near the main staircase, she saw the child, a small shadow sitting on the marble steps, tiny and alone inside the mansion's vastness. Sofia Castellano, 8 years old, black hair like her father's, but eyes that were different blue, as the sea warm as honey, in sunlight the very same eyes as the woman in the portrait Grace had glimpsed in passing down a hallway, the girl's mother, the woman who was no longer here. Sofia wore a white shirt and black pants, neat and proper, like a miniature adult, yet her face still held its childhood round cheeks, pink lips, and those blue eyes. God, those blue eyes held a loneliness no 8-year-old should ever have to learn. In front of Sofia lay dozens of toy cars, and she was lining them up in perfectly straight rows, careful to the inch. making sure each car sat the same distance from the next, making sure every wheel was aligned just so her movements slow and exact, as if this were the most important work in the world. No one sat beside her, no servant, no guard, no father. Sophia sat there alone on the staircase, surrounded by luxury, as if she were invisible, as if she did not exist. Grace saw at once the way everyone treated this child. The servants who passed by did not even glance her way. They changed direction to avoid the sunroom. They lowered their heads even further and walked faster, as if Sophia's presence were something to be dodged. The bodyguards stood watch in the corridor, but never stepped close. They looked through her the way you look through air. No one greeted her. No one smiled at her. No one acknowledged that she was there. The daughter of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, lonelier than anyone Grace had ever met in her life. And then Grace noticed it. Sophia was doing something over and over, her right hand lifting, touching her right ear only a light touch. But each time her finger met her ear, the child's face tightened, her lips pressed hard. Her eyes squeezed shut for a fraction of a second. Pain, unmistakable pain. Then she lowered her hand, went back to arranging the cars, and a few seconds later, her hand rose again, touched the ear, her face pinched again, repeating like a spiral with no end. Grace counted 17 times in an hour. 17 times the hand rose to that ear, and 17 times that little face twisted with hurt. This was not a habit. Grace knew the difference. A habit did not carve that kind of pain into a child's expression. This was a reflex, the reflex of someone trying to soothe an ache they did not know how to stop. The memory of Ethan surged in so fast it stole Grace's breath. Ethan at 2 with a middle ear infection, touching his ear like that, wincing and crying. "Mom, it hurts," her son had said, tears sliding down his cheeks. Grace had panicked when she saw him tugging at his ear and crying without stopping. She had carried Ethan to the doctor that very night, and they found an infection, antibiotics, eardrops. A week later, Ethan was well, running and laughing as if nothing had ever happened. But what about Sophia? This child was the daughter of a billionaire, the daughter of a man who had spent millions of dollars taking her across the world in search of cures, and yet no one had noticed she was in pain. No one had taken her to have the ear that tormented her every day examined. Grace wanted to rush to her, wanted to pull Sophia into her arms, wanted to tell someone that this child needed help. But she remembered Mrs. Cross's warning. The girl before had tried to help, and she had disappeared after 3 days. No one knew where she went. Grace had a mother waiting in a nursing home. She needed money. She needed her daughter to survive. Grace could not die here. She turned away, trying to forget those lonely blue eyes, trying to forget that face tightening with pain, trying to forget the image of a child sitting alone in a palace no one would even look at. But Sophia did not let her forget so easily. If this story already has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Now let us get back to that mansion in Chicago. One afternoon, as Grace was cleaning the hallway near the sunroom, she heard a sound, not a voice because Sophia could not speak, but the sound of plastic striking marble, over and over, dropping, then dropping again, steady as a mournful rhythm. She stopped her hand, tilted her head to listen, then walked to the sunroom door and looked inside. Sophia was sitting in the middle of the floor, and in front of her was an unfinished model airplane. and she was trying to attach the wing to the body, but her small fingers were not nimble enough. The wing kept slipping out, falling to the floor, and she picked it up and tried again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each failure tightened Sophia's face, a little more pressed her lips together, harder drew her brows into a deeper frown, made her shoulders tremble as she tried to hold something back inside. The 4th time, the wing fell again, and Sophia punched the floor not hard, but full of anger, full of helplessness, full of despair. An 8-year-old child sitting there alone, unable to finish a simple model airplane, and no one was there to help her, no one cared, no one even looked. Grace felt her heart squeezed shut. She should leave. She knew that Mrs. Cross had warned her clearly. Do not make contact with Mr. Castellano's daughter. The girl before had tried to be friendly, and she had disappeared. No one knew where she went, and no one dared to ask. Grace had a mother waiting in a nursing home. She needed medicine money. She needed her daughter alive to pay the hospital bills. Grace could not die here. She was not allowed to die. She turned to walk away, but her feet would not move, as if they had been glued to the floor by something invisible. Sophia's blue eyes. God, those blue eyes looked so much like Ethan's. The same loneliness, the same pain, the same look of a child who had learned how to be abandoned, had learned how to endure, alone had learned not to wait for anyone to come. Grace did not know what she was doing. Her body moved on instinct, not on reason. Her feet carried her into the sunroom, carried her to Sophia, and she knelt on the cold floor, gently picked up the airplane wing. Sophia startled and lifted her head, her blue eyes wide with surprise, with fear, with confusion. She was not used to anyone coming close, not used to anyone seeing her. For 8 years, she had learned how to be invisible, and now suddenly someone was kneeling right in front of her. Grace said nothing. She knew Sophia could not hear. Instead, she held the wing slowly, placed it in the right position on the airplane's body, pressed lightly, and it snapped into place with a small click. Perfect. She set the airplane down in front of Sophia, then lifted her gaze to the child's face. Sophia stared at her no longer, afraid, only astonished, only curious, only something Grace could not name, something that softened her heart and made it ache at the same time. Grace raised both hands and began to sign language. She had learned it 4 years earlier, when Ethan was still alive. She had read a study that said children who learned sign language developed language better. So she and Ethan had learned together every night. Mother and son sitting on the bed practicing simple signs. Mom-child love hungry. Sleep, and Ethan's favorite sign had been butterfly because it looked like 2 butterfly wings fluttering. After Ethan died, Grace thought she would forget it all. But she had not forgotten. Those signs still lived in her memory, like scars that never healed. I am Grace, she signed slowly. What is your name? Sophia's mouth fell open. She looked at Grace's hands as if Grace had just performed magic, as if Grace had done the impossible. Then she looked up into Grace's face, and in those blue eyes there was something glimmering that Grace had never seen there before. Hope. Sophia raised her hands and signed back slowly but accurately. Sophia, how do you know sign language? Grace smiled, but the smile hurt. My son is learning. She signed, then stopped. Is learning, not learned, because she could not say Ethan was dead. She could not bring herself to form those words, not now, not with this child, looking at her with eyes full of hope. Tears rose without her control, and Grace stood too fast turned and walked out of the sunroom. She did not dare look back, because if she looked into those blue eyes one more time, she would not be able to leave. But Sophia had seen her for the first time in 8 years. Someone had seen her for the first time, someone had spoken to her for the first time, someone had cared, and she would not let Grace go so easily. From that day on, everything changed. The next day, as Grace was mopping the main foyer at 6 in the morning, she felt someone watching her. She lifted her head and saw Sophia standing at the corner of the staircase, half her body hidden behind a stone column, those blue eyes tracking every movement of Grace's hands. When their eyes met, Sophia did not run the way Grace expected. The child stayed where she was and raised her hand, signing a single word, "Hello." Grace swallowed, glanced around to make sure no one was there, then lifted her own hand and signed back, "Hello, Sophia." A smile bloomed on the girl's lips, small but radiant like sunlight, breaking through clouds after a storm, and Grace felt her heart melt. From that day on, Sophia began to follow Grace every day. She memorized Grace's work schedule with an almost frightening speed. At 6 in the morning, when Grace cleaned the main foyer, Sophia sat on the stairs, looking down at 9 in the morning, when Grace wiped the living room. Sophia stood outside the door, watching at 2 in the afternoon when Grace did laundry in the basement. Sophia slipped down and sat on the steps. The girl never came too close, never caused trouble. She was simply there, silent, as if Grace's presence was all she needed, as if just seeing Grace was enough to make that day matter. They began to have secret conversations, brief conversations, stolen from moments when no one was paying attention, when Mrs. Cross was on the other side of the mansion, when the bodyguards changed shifts and there were 15 minutes of lax supervision, when no eyes were watching. Grace would pass by, pause for a few seconds, sign a quick question. "Are you okay? Have you eaten breakfast? What did you do today?" And Sophia would answer her blue eyes lighting up each time she was asked, lighting up, in a way Grace had never seen before, because this was the first time someone had truly wanted to know how she was not to report back to her father, not out of duty, but out of real care. Then one evening, as Grace was cleaning the sunroom after her shift, Sophia slipped in and sat down beside her silent for a long time before she began to sign, and what she said tore Grace's heart apart. "My father never looks at me." Sophia signed, her eyes lowered to the floor. "Every time he walks past, he turns his face away, as if looking at me hurts him, as if I do not exist." Grace wanted to say Sophia was mistaken, that her father loved her, but she had watched Vincent pass the sunroom dozens of times without ever turning his head to look inside. She could not lie to this child. "The servants are afraid of me." Sophia continued, her hands shaking as she signed. "They think I am cursed. I see them talking. I cannot hear, but I can read lips. They say my mother died, giving birth to me, that she took my hearing into the grave. They say I am payback for what my father has done." She paused, drawing a deep breath, as if trying to hold something down. "And the doctors, they only see money. They come, they examine me, they talk to my father, they take the money and leave. No one asks if I am in pain. No one even looks me in the eyes." Sophia lifted her gaze, and in those blue eyes was a grief no 8-year-old should ever have to know. "Only you," she signed. "You are the first person who has seen me. You are the first person who asked if I am okay. You are the first person who cared." Grace could not speak, could not sign. She only knew she reached out and pulled Sophia into her arms, holding her tight, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Sophia went rigid for a moment, her body tensing, because she was not used to being touched, not used to being held 8 years in this life, and she could count on one hand the number of times anyone had hugged her. Then she gave in, collapsed against Grace's chest, her small shoulders trembling in waves. There was no sound of sobbing. Sophia did not know how to cry out loud, but the tears poured anyway, soaking Grace's shirt, and Grace held her, stroked her hair, letting her cry for all the lonely years, for every time she had been ignored, for every pain no one bothered to ask about. They sat there in the dark, two broken souls who had found each other, and they did not know that someone was standing outside the door in the darkness watching. Over these past days, Vincent had begun to notice that something had shifted inside his mansion. Not something loud, not something you could point to at once, but a subtle change like a faint breeze moving through a house that was usually as still as a tomb. Sophia was no longer sitting alone on the staircase. The daughter he had spent 8 years trying not to look at was no longer there each time he passed by, lining up toy cars in solitude. She moved more now, appearing in different parts of the mansion at different times, as if she were following someone's schedule, as if an invisible magnet were pulling her from place to place. Vincent did not know who it was. He did not ask. He did not investigate. But he could feel the change in the air, in the way Sophia carried herself, in something he could not name, but knew was real. Then one night, when Vincent could not sleep and stepped out to walk the dark hallway the way he often did, he saw a thin spill of light coming from the sunroom at the end of the corridor. Who was in there at this hour? He moved closer, stopped in front of the half-closed door, and looked through the crack. Grace, the new housekeeper, was sitting on the floor with Sophia, and between them was a stack of colored paper and a few paper cranes already folded. She was teaching Sophia origami, her hands moving slowly, folding each crease with care so Sophia could follow. Then she placed a sheet of paper into Sophia's hands, and the child began to copy her. Sophia did it wrong. The paper crumpled in her small fingers, but instead of growing angry the way she usually did, she looked up at Grace, and Grace smiled, took another sheet, put it into Sophia's hands, and started again from the beginning. No hurry, no judgment, only endless patience. Then Sophia got it right. She lifted the paper crane, ugly and crooked, but still a crane, and she smiled. Vincent felt as if someone had driven a fist straight into his chest so hard he had to raise a hand to the wall to steady himself. That smile, God, that smile. The curve of her lips, the light in her eyes, her whole face brightening, as if sunlight had found its way in. Catalina, so much like Catalina that his heart seemed to stop. 8 years, for 8 years he had not dared to look at his daughter, because every time he met those blue eyes, he saw Catalina again. He saw that fatal night. Again he saw lips moving without words, and the light fading from his wife's eyes. The pain had been too big, and he had run from it. He had let others care for Sophia. He had done everything he could, except the one thing that mattered most. He had not been there for his child. And now he saw it clearly. His daughter carried her mother's smile, the smile he had thought was gone forever. "Boss!" Marcus's voice came from behind him, low and careful. Vincent did not turn. He knew the head of security had been standing there for a while. "She is breaking the rules," Marcus said. Mrs. Cross forbids contact with the young miss. Do you want me to handle it? Vincent stayed silent, his eyes still fixed on the narrow gap in the door. Inside the sunroom, Grace was signing something to Sophia. The child nodded, signed back, and both of them laughed. She knows sign language. No one in this mansion knew sign language except the teacher Vincent had hired. The one Sophia hated because he was cold and impatient. But with Grace, Sophia was laughing. For the first time in years, his daughter was laughing. No, Vincent said, his voice low and absolute. Let her stay. Marcus said nothing, only nodded and melted back into the darkness. Vincent remained there a little longer, watching his daughter through the crack in the door. For the first time in 8 years, he looked at Sophia without turning away, without running, without hiding behind the walls he had built. The child was not a curse, not payback. She was only a lonely child who needed to be loved, and he had not given her that. Vincent turned away and stepped into the dark, but this time something had changed inside him, and he did not know that Grace was not only connecting with Sophia, she was also noticing something else, something that dozens of the world's top doctors had missed. The question about Sophia's ear would not leave Grace's mind. It clung to her like a small thorn buried deep in skin, not painful enough to make her scream, but irritating enough that she could not forget it. Every day while she worked, Grace watched Sophia, and every day she counted the number of times the child touched her right ear 17 times in an hour. 17 times that small hand rose to the rim of the ear. 17 times Sophia's face tightened into an expression of pain. She tried to hide, but could not hide from Grace. This was not a habit. Grace knew the difference between a habit and a symptom. A habit did not carve that look into a child's face. A habit did not make lips press tight and eyes squeeze shut for a split second of pain, then open again as if nothing had happened. This was a symptom of something real that was hurting her, and no one was paying attention. Then one afternoon, as Grace was wiping the glass outside the sunroom, the opportunity she never expected finally came. Sophia sat near the window, that day less than a meter from Grace, separated only by the clear pane, and the child's right ear was turned toward her. The late afternoon light struck at just the right angle, poured through the glass, and shone straight into Sophia's ear canal. And Grace looked in. For the first time she looked closely, truly close, and she saw it. There was something in there, dark-colored deep in the canal. Not shadow, not a reflection of light, but a real object, dense, stuck to the wall of the ear canal, as if it had been there a long time. Grace stopped breathing. Her hand holding the rag began to tremble. She tried to see better, tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and the dark mass did not move. It lay there perfectly still, blocking the ear canal like a small wall. Grace's heart hammered in her chest as questions rushed in like floodwater. Dozens of doctors had examined Sophia, and from Johns Hopkins to Mayo Clinic, from Switzerland to Tokyo. Hundreds of tests performed, millions of dollars spent. So why had no one seen what she, a housekeeper with no medical degree, could see through a pane of glass? Why had no one found it? Or had they found it and not cared? Or had they seen it and chosen to do nothing? Grace needed answers. She needed the truth. And she knew where the answers were in Sophia's medical records. Those thick files recording 8 years of treatments, dozens of reports from the world's top hospitals. If there was anything abnormal, it would be in there. But medical records were not something a housekeeper could access easily. They were kept in Vincent Castellano's office on the second floor at the end of the west hallway, a room no one was allowed to enter without the boss's permission. Grace began to observe not Sophia anymore, but the mansion itself, watching the guards' routines, watching the placement of security cameras. 2 weeks passed, and Grace had memorized every detail. The camera in the main hallway, but a blind spot at the right corner where the corridor turned into the office. The guards changed shifts at 9 at night, and there were about 15 minutes when they let their attention slip during the handoff. Mrs. Cross went to her room after dinner and rarely came out after 8. Grace waited patient as a cat, stalking prey, waiting for the perfect chance to act without being discovered. And that chance arrived when Vincent had to go to Detroit. News of Vincent's trip to Detroit spread through the mansion that morning. A meeting with other crews, tense negotiations over territory and power, expected to last 2 days, and Vincent would take Marcus with him, along with most of his most elite bodyguards. Grace heard it from the servants' whispers in the kitchen, and her heart began to beat faster. This was the chance she had been waiting for over the past 2 weeks. When the glossy black convoy rolled out through the gates that afternoon, the Castellano estate felt emptier than it ever had, leaving only a few guards on the night shift, Mrs. Cross in her private room, and the servants who had retreated to their quarters after a long day of work. Grace waited, counting each minute as it slipped away, her heart pounding in her chest as if it wanted to leap out. 9 at night, just as she had observed the guards changed shifts 15 chaotic minutes, as the old hands passed duties to the new 15 minutes when surveillance was at its loosest. Grace left her basement room, moving as quietly as a ghost, following the route she had mapped in her mind for 2 full weeks, avoiding pools of light, hugging the walls where the cameras did not sweep. Her heart running wild, but her steps steady. The west staircase, the second-floor corridor, the right-hand corner, where the camera had a blind spot, and finally she stood before the oak door that led into Vincent Castellano's office. Her hand settled on the doorknob icy cold, and she turned it gently. The door was not locked. Of course, it was not locked. Vincent Castellano did not need locks in his own house. No one dared enter without permission. No one except a desperate housekeeper searching for answers for a child. Grace stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and switched on the small flashlight she had hidden in her coat pocket. The weak beam swept the room, a walnut desk, a black leather chair, bookshelves rising to the ceiling, and in the corner a metal filing cabinet. Grace went to it, pulled a drawer open, and searched. Sophia Castellano medical records. She found it in the third drawer, a thick stack of folders nearly half a meter tall. 8 years of examinations and treatments captured page by page. She began to read, and what she saw stole her breath. Johns Hopkins. $200,000. The conclusion was congenital deafness due to a malformation of the ear canal, irreversible, no treatment. Mayo Clinic, $150,000. The same result, congenital deafness, a recommendation to learn sign language and adapt to a life without sound. Switzerland, Tokyo, London. Berlin, dozens of the world's leading hospitals. Dozens of the most famous ear, nose, and throat specialists, all of them delivering the same conclusion. Congenital deafness cannot be cured, accept it. In total, more than $10 million over 8 years, $10 million for the same answer, repeated again and again. And Grace felt anger boiling in her chest as she turned each page. Then she realized it, the thing she had suspected for a long time, but only now had proof. Every report contained full testing CT scans, MRI hearing assessments, all the most advanced technology money could buy. But not a single report included a detailed otoscope examination. Not a single doctor had truly looked into Sophia's ear canal with the naked eye and recorded what they saw. All the conclusions were suspiciously identical. Bone abnormality, congenital atresia, a benign bony mass blocking the ear canal, and Grace understood the doctors had seen a pale, hard blockage in Sophia's ear. On the imaging they had seen it, but they thought it was bone. They thought it was part of the skull. They thought it was a congenital defect that could not be corrected, and no one dared touch it for fear of damaging the brain. No one dared question it. No one dared look closer. But Grace had seen the mass with her own eyes through the sunroom window glass. And it was not pale like bone, it was dark brown black, the color of earwax hardened over years. Grace put the files back, exactly where they belonged, turned off the flashlight, and slipped out of the office the same way she had come. If she was right, if the obstruction was not bone, but impacted earwax, accumulated, and hardened over 8 years, then Sophia could be helped. No complex surgery, no millions of dollars, only someone brave enough to look closely and act. But she needed to confirm it. With her own eyes, she needed to look inside Sophia's ear and know for certain it was not bone. And that meant she had to do what the world's top doctors had not dared to do. Grace spent the entire next day preparing silently and carefully, like a surgery she had no training to perform. From the first aid box in the kitchen, she took a small pair of tweezers, the sharp-tipped kind used to pull out splinters, and she soaked it in medical alcohol for hours, let it dry, then soaked it again, making sure not a single germ could survive. She replaced the batteries in her small flashlight, tested the beam, adjusted its focus until the light was strong enough and narrow enough to shine into a space as small as an ear canal. She prepared a clean towel, sterile saline, taken from the medicine cabinet, sterile cotton, everything bundled tight and hidden inside her coat pocket, ready for tonight. But when night fell and the mansion sank into silence, Grace lay on her bed in the small basement room, eyes wide open, staring up at the dark ceiling, and she could not sleep. Fear crawled up slowly, like a snake coiling around her throat and tightening. She was not a doctor, she had no medical license, no training. She was only a housekeeper with $47 in her pocket and a shattered heart. Who was she to do what the world's best specialists had not dared to do? What if she got it wrong? What if her hand shook and the tweezers slipped deeper than they should? She could rupture Sophia's eardrum, cause an infection that spread to the brain, make the child permanently deaf. Instead of only temporarily deaf, she could kill the very child she was trying to save. And then Vincent would kill her slowly and painfully, the way he had promised to do to anyone who dared lay a hand on his daughter. Tears ran down Grace's cheeks as she thought of everything that could go wrong, all the terrible consequences waiting if she failed, and she wanted to give up. She wanted to forget it all. She wanted to keep being an invisible ghost in this mansion and pretend she had seen nothing. Then the memory of Ethan crashed into her, clear and brutal as if it had happened yesterday. Ethan in her arms, blood soaking the blue shirt he loved, his eyes fading as he looked up at his Mom. It hurts. The last whisper her son breathed before the light went out forever. She had not saved Ethan, she had held him and watched him slip away, unable to do anything. And that pain had followed her for 3 years, waking with her every morning and going to sleep with her every night. The first thing she thought of when she opened her eyes, and the last thing she thought of before she fell into nightmare sleep. But this time was different. This time she was not helpless. This time she could do something. This time she had a chance to save a child. Instead of only standing there and watching, Grace closed her eyes, clasped her hands at her chest, and whispered into the darkness, "God, please guide my hands. Please give me steadiness. Please help me save this child." She had not saved Ethan. She would carry that pain for the rest of her life, but she would not abandon Sophia, not this time, not when she could do something. 10 at night, the mansion lay in darkness. Only a few hallway lights faintly glowing and the steady sound of a guard's patrol footsteps. Grace stepped out of her room, her coat pocket heavy with the tools she had prepared, and she walked toward Sophia's room. What she was about to do could save the girl's life or end her own. What Grace was about to do could save the girl's life or end her own. Stay with us to see what happens next. Grace slipped through the hallway, black as ink, her footsteps so light that even she could not hear them, keeping close to the walls, avoiding the pools of light from the corridor lamps, steering clear of the corners where she knew a camera might sweep her heart, pounding wildly in her chest, but her pace still steady. The remaining guard in the mansion was patrolling the east wing. She had about 10 minutes before he came back, 10 minutes to do the thing she had prepared for over many days. She stopped at Sophia's door, drew a deep breath to steady herself, then tapped 3 soft knocks, a private signal she and Sophia had created over the past days. 3 knocks meant, "I am here, it is safe." The door opened almost at once, and Sophia stood there, wide blue eyes lifted to Grace. She had not gone to bed, still wearing her daytime clothes, as if she had been waiting for something, as if she knew something would happen tonight. Grace stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and dropped to her knees until she was level with Sophia's eyes. She raised her hands and began to sign, slowly and clearly, "Sophia, I need you to trust me. I need to look into your ear. Do you trust me?" Sophia looked at Grace for a long moment, those blue eyes deep as the sea. Then she nodded, no questions, no hesitation, no fear. Only the absolute trust of a child who had finally found the first person who truly saw her. Grace led Sophia to the window, where the full moon cast a silver stripe across the floor. She had Sophia sit in a chair, tilt her head to the left, with the right ear facing up. Then Grace pulled the flashlight from her pocket. Her hand shook as she switched it on and shone it into Sophia's ear canal. The light cutting inward, and Grace saw it more clearly than ever before. The blockage sat deep inside, large, pale, with a yellow-gray cast, looking exactly like bone, the way the doctors had described in the records. But Grace looked closer. She tilted the flashlight, shifted the angle, and she saw what no one had bothered to notice. A small crack, a thin, fragile seam between the blockage and the wall of the ear canal where skin met the foreign object. If this were bone, if it were truly part of the skull, the way the doctors believed, it would be continuous with the surrounding tissue. There would be no crack, no seam. but this was separate something that did not belong to the body, something that could be removed. Grace took the sterilized tweezers from her pocket, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. She closed her eyes for 1 second. God, please steady my hand. And when she opened them, her fingers were suddenly firm in a way they had never been before. She guided the tweezers into Sophia's ear, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. Careful not to scrape the canal wall, careful not to cause the child pain. Sophia lay perfectly still, her blue eyes fixed on the ceiling, trusting completely in the woman bent over her. No fear, no flinch, only the strange calm of a child who had decided to place her fate in the hands of the only person who cared. Grace caught the edge of the blockage with the tips of the tweezers, tightened her grip, and pulled. Nothing moved. The blockage clung to the ear canal wall as if it had grown roots there, as if it belonged. Grace drew a breath, adjusted the angle, clamped down harder, and pulled a second time. There was movement, tiny, but enough for Grace to know she was on the right path. She pulled a third time, a little stronger, a little more patient, and then it happened. A small pop echoed in the quiet room, and the blockage came free, held in the tweezers. Grace drew it out and looked. What she held was almost the size of an adult's pinky fingertip, black, dense, hard as stone, carrying the unpleasant smell of something trapped too long in a sealed space. This was not bone. This was earwax that had built up and hardened over 8 years. 8 years sitting in Sophia's ear and blocking every sound. 8 years stealing her hearing, while dozens of doctors stared at it on scan screens and decided it was part of her skull. Grace set the blockage on the table, her hands trembling, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. And she turned back to Sophia, and then the miracle happened. Sophia jolted upright, as if someone had yanked her out of sleep, her blue eyes wider than they had ever been round, and wild, scanning the room as if she were seeing an entirely new world. Her head turned left, right up down, like a small bird released from a cage, and unsure which way to fly. Grace watched her heart pounding out of rhythm, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope. And then she realized what Sophia was staring at. The wall clock, the old clock with its pendulum swinging in a steady arc, tick, tick, tick. A tiny sound Grace had heard 1,000 times without noticing, but for Sophia, it was the first sound she had ever heard in her life. Sophia pointed at the clock, her finger trembling her mouth, moving as if she were trying to say something, but did not know how 8 years without hearing a single sound, 8 years without knowing what her own voice would even feel like. And now she was trying, fighting to shape her first word. Tie. Tick. Sophia's voice came out hoarse and clumsy, the voice of someone learning to speak again from the beginning. But it was a word, a real word, the first in 8 years, the first in her life, that Sophia herself made and heard with her own ears. Grace's tears burst out like a spring. She could not hold them back, did not want to hold them back. She had done it, she had truly done it, a housekeeper with no medical license, with a pair of tweezers and a flashlight, had done what dozens of the world's top doctors with millions of dollars in equipment had not done. She pulled Sophia into her arms, held her tight, as if the child might vanish if she let go, and for the first time since meeting Sophia, she spoke out loud instead of signing. "You can hear now, sweetheart, you can hear now." Sophia trembled in Grace's arms, her small hand lifted to touch her right ear, and Grace saw it. Sophia's face did not pinch with pain anymore. For the first time in 8 years, she touched her ear without hurting. Sophia looked up at Grace, blue eyes shining with tears, and her mouth moved again, struggling to shape sound, struggling to say one more word, a word more important than all the others. Grace, her name the second word. Sophia learned not mother, not father, but Grace, the woman who had seen her when the whole world turned away. The one who had dared to do what no one else dared, the one who had saved her from 8 years of silence. Grace held her even tighter, crying and laughing at the same time. Tears streaming down her cheeks, but her lips stretched into the brightest smile she had ever worn. And in that moment, all the pain of the past 3 years seemed to dissolve. Ethan Derrick the crash, everything falling back into the distance, leaving only Sophia in her arms. Sophia saying her name, Sophia hearing. Sophia pulled back from Grace, her blue eyes blazing, her mouth moving again, trying to say something more, and this time word by word, slow and difficult, as if each word were a mountain she had to climb. I want, hear, Dad. Dad. Sophia wanted to hear her father's voice, the man who had not looked at her for 8 years, the man who had spent millions trying to cure her, but had never dared to look her in the eye. And now Sophia wanted to hear him. Grace smiled, wiped the tears from her cheeks, and nodded. It was done. She had done what no one else could. Sophia would be okay. She would hear her father speak, hear birds singing rain, falling wind moving, all the sounds she had been robbed of for 8 years. And Grace would have money to save her mother. Everything would be fine. Everything would finally be fine. Then heavy footsteps sounded out in the hallway. Sophia's bedroom door flew open with a thunderous bang, so hard the hinges groaned and the walls seemed to shudder, and Vincent Castellano stood there filling the doorway like a wild animal that had caught the scent of blood. His face was white as paper, but his eyes were bloodshot from sleeplessness, bloodshot with rage, bloodshot with a primitive fear he could not control. Marcus had called him 3 hours earlier in the middle of a tense meeting with other crews in Detroit, the head of security, urgent and tight boss. Something strange is happening at the estate. A servant saw the new housekeeper slip out in the night, headed toward the young Mrs. room. Vincent did not need to hear another word. He stood up in the middle of the meeting, leaving the other bosses staring at him in shock. And he ran for the car and drove through the night back to Chicago, 4 hours on the highway, with his foot pressed nearly to the floor, and now he was here in his daughter's room, and he was looking at the worst thing he could imagine, Grace the housekeeper he had allowed to stay, holding his daughter on the bed, and there was blood on her hands. 8 years for 8 years, Vincent had built a fortress around Sophia. He had hired the best guards set. The strictest rules threatened anyone who dared come near his child. Done everything to protect her from the brutal outside world. And now a snake had slipped all the way to his daughter's bedside in the middle of the night. Fury erupted inside Vincent, like a volcano smothering reason, swallowing every clear thought. He saw nothing but red, heard nothing but his own blood roaring in his ears, and he lunged. Vincent tore Grace away from Sophia with such force that she flew off the bed and slammed onto the cold floor, the impact cracking through the room, but he did not care. He grabbed her by the hair, yanked her up, and drove her head into the wall. Grace cried out in pain, But Vincent did not stop. He seized her by the throat, lifted her clear off the ground, pinned her back against the wall, his hand clamped around her neck like an iron vise. "What did you do?" Vincent roared, his voice like a beast, like thunder, like the sound of hell itself opening its doors. "What did you do to my daughter? I will kill you slowly. I will show you what pain is." Grace could not answer, she could not breathe. Vincent's grip was too tight. Air could not reach her lungs. She clawed at his arm, but it might as well have been stone. He did not move at all. Her vision began to blur. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. She was dying, she knew she was dying, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. No. The scream tore through the room, rough horse imperfect, like the sound of an animal trying to break its chains, like a soul screaming for freedom. The scream came from Sophia. She had leapt off the bed and was standing there, mouth wide, throat vibrating with a sound she had never made in 8 years. Not perfect, not clear, but loud enough, strong enough to shake the room, strong enough to freeze Vincent where he stood. He turned his head slowly, as if he could not believe what he had just heard, and he saw Sophia, his daughter, standing there with blue eyes full of tears, and her mouth still open, still trying to say something more. Sophia ran to her father, grabbed the hand that was crushing Grace's throat, and pulled it down. Then she placed her father's hand against her own neck, where her vocal cords were trembling. "Dad!" Sophia's voice came out hoarse and clumsy, but it was a word, a real word, the word she had not been able to say for 8 years, the word Vincent had never believed he would hear his daughter speak. Then Sophia signed frantic, so fast her hands looked like they were dancing in the air. "She saved me. She took something out of my ear. I can hear now. I can hear you now." Vincent released Grace, and she dropped to the floor like a rag doll, coughing and choking, fighting to draw breath, fighting to stay alive. But Vincent did not look at her anymore. He only looked at Sophia, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his daughter's face. Her tear-soaked cheeks, her lips still moving as she tried to form more words. "You can hear," Vincent whispered, his voice trembling as if he were standing on the edge of collapse. "My daughter can hear." Sophia nodded, tears spilling down, and Vincent felt his world spinning. But he needed answers. He needed to know why dozens of doctors, millions of dollars, 8 years of searching, had not done what a housekeeper had done with a pair of tweezers. But the truth waiting at the hospital would shatter everything Vincent thought he knew. Stay with us. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. 2 in the morning, and Vincent Castellano walked through the automatic glass doors with Sophia in his arms, the child dozing on her father's shoulder, exhausted after a night of upheaval. Yet a faint smile still lingering on her lips, a smile Vincent had not seen in 8 years. He had called ahead before leaving the estate, a brief call delivered in a voice that allowed no argument, and now an entire medical team was waiting in the lobby. The head of ear, nose, and throat nurses, technicians, all in white coats standing straight like soldiers awaiting orders. No one dared ask why the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago was bringing his daughter to the hospital in the middle of the night. No one dared hold his gaze for too long. No one dared do anything except lower their heads and lead the way. Back at the mansion, Grace was still being held in the basement security room, her throat bruised with the marks of 5 fingers, waiting for a fate She did not yet know life or death, freedom or hell, all of it, depending on what Vincent would discover tonight. Sophia was taken into the ear, nose, and throat exam room, laid on a spotless white bed, surrounded by modern equipment. The doctor gently scoped her ear canal, tested her hearing on an audiometer, then sent her for a CT scan to check for any internal damage. Vincent did not go into the room with his daughter. He could not sit still. He paced the hallway like a caged animal, heavy footsteps echoing on the polished tile. His hands clenching, releasing, clenching. Again his mind spinning with 1,000 questions that had no answers. 45 minutes later, the exam room door opened and the department head stepped out, a middle-aged man with graying hair and gold-rimmed glasses, his face carrying a strange expression, half astonishment, half confusion, as if he had witnessed something he could not quite explain. "Mr. Castellano," the doctor said, trying to keep his voice steady, though it still trembled, "I have good news. Sophia's hearing is at 90%, almost completely normal. There is no eardrum damage, no infection, no complications of any kind." Vincent stood as if turned to stone, unable to believe what he was hearing. 90% after 8 years, after millions of dollars, after dozens of the world's top hospitals. A housekeeper with a pair of tweezers and a flashlight had done what no one else had done. The person who removed the obstruction, the doctor continued. His admiration impossible to hide, did an excellent job. Precise, clean, without causing any injury at all. If I did not know beforehand, I would think this was the work of an experienced ear, nose, and throat physician. "What was the obstruction?" Vincent asked, his voice low and threatening. The doctor swallowed. "Earwax, sir. Earwax and dead skin cells built up over many years, hardened into a solid mass. Medicine calls it keratosis obturans, an extremely rare case. The hardened wax changes color over time, and on imaging it looks exactly like a bony tumor." The doctor paused as if weighing whether he should go on. Normally a physician would not dare touch it for fear of injuring the brain, because it sits too close to sensitive structures. For an ordinary doctor, the mistake is understandable. But for the world's top specialists with the most advanced equipment— He did not finish the sentence, but Vincent understood. The best in the world should have seen it clearly. They should have known it was not bone. They should have done something. "Bring me every old medical record for my daughter Vincent," said his voice like cold steel. Now, 15 minutes later, Vincent sat in a hospital conference room with a stack of files nearly half a meter high in front of him. 8 years of examinations recorded across thousands of pages, and he began to read one page at a time, searching for something he did not yet know, something that could explain why his daughter had endured 8 years of silence when the answer might have been there all along. And he found it on page 47. Page 47. A report from 5 years ago, the paper slightly yellowed with time, but the typed words still sharp, as if they had been struck onto the page yesterday, and the name in the top corner made Vincent stop cold. Dr. Richard Harmon, Chair of Otolaryngology, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. One of the leading specialists in America in the field of hearing. The man Vincent had paid $500,000 just to get an appointment moved up by 1 month. Vincent remembered that trip he had flown to Baltimore. With Sophia stayed 3 days in a 5-star hotel, waiting, and Harmon had examined Sophia with the grave face of a scientist studying a complicated mystery. Then he had shaken his head with regret and said there was nothing to be done, congenital deafness irreversible accepted. But now Vincent was staring at the page in front of him, and what he read made the world stop turning. In black ink on white paper, clear and undeniable. Recorded dense obstruction in the right ear canal. Object is of significant size, completely blocking the canal. Recommend immediate removal to restore hearing. Vincent read the line once, then twice, then 3 times, then 10, his eyes sweeping back and forth over the words as if they might change if he stared long enough, but they did not change. They stayed there stark and final, a sentence written 5 years ago that no one had bothered to carry out. Harmon had known. 5 years ago he had seen the obstruction in Sophia's ear. He had written it down, he had recommended removal, he had known Vincent's daughter could hear again with a simple procedure. So why had no one done anything? Why had Sophia been forced to endure 5 more years of silence? Why had Vincent never received this report? Vincent flipped to the next page and his heart stopped. A printed email clipped into the file, perhaps by carelessness, perhaps because someone forgot to remove it, a small mistake, but enough to expose everything. An email from Dr. Richard Harmon to a colleague, dated the same day as Sophia's exam, and its contents made Vincent feel as if a knife had been driven straight into his heart. Castellano patient steady revenue. Source father is Vincent Castellano. Chicago boss money is not an issue, willing to pay any price to cure his daughter. Flag for prolonged treatment plan. Do not resolve definitively. Schedule monthly follow-ups. Estimated billing $50,000 per month for tests and consultations. Do not lose this big fish. Vincent read it, and his world shattered into a million pieces. They had known for 5 years they had known his daughter could be cured with a simple procedure that could be done in minutes. They had seen the problem recorded, it recommended removal, and yet they did not do it. They chose not to do it. They chose to keep Sophia deaf so they could keep bleeding Vincent for money. They turned a father's desperation into a gold mine for their pockets. They sold 5 years of a child's life for monthly checks. Vincent's hand began to shake, the paper crumpling in his fist, his knuckles white from the force of his grip, and from deep in his chest a fury rose dark and primal. The fury of a Mafia boss when he discovers betrayal. The fury of a father when he learns his child has been harmed. They kept my daughter deaf for money. Vincent roared each word, fired out like a bullet from his throat. He surged to his feet, kicked the chair backward, metal slamming into the wall with a shrieking clang, and he bellowed for Marcus. Find Dr. Richard Harmon. Vincent said his voice like thunder rolling up from hell, cold and full of promise for the horrors to come. Bring him to me alive. I want him alive when I begin. Marcus gave a single nod, his face empty of expression, and disappeared into the darkness. 3 days later, Dr. Richard Harmon would never be seen again. Then another thought struck Vincent like lightning cutting through the rage and burning away everything else in his mind. Grace. The woman he had nearly killed only a few hours ago. The only person in 8 years who had looked into Sophia's ear and seen what dozens of doctors had deliberately ignored. The one who had saved his daughter while others were draining him dry, and he had choked her, driven her head into the wall, nearly killed her in front of his own child. Vincent stormed out of the hospital, ran to his car, and drove like a madman back to the estate. The security room in the Castellano mansion basement was a cold concrete box with no windows, nothing but an iron chair bolted to the floor and a weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. Flickering as if it too were exhausted after a long night, Grace sat on that iron chair alone in the dark, her hands cuffed behind her back, her throat burning every time she swallowed, and she knew that if there were a mirror, she would see 5 bruises shaped like fingers printed clearly on her neck, the mark of Vincent Castellano, the mark of death she had almost touched. Her lips were split, dried blood crusted, at the corner of her mouth, her head still ringing from being slammed into the wall. But she did not cry. She did not feel fear. She only sat there, eyes closed, lips moving with the silent prayers she had learned as a little girl, asking God to protect Sophia, asking God to keep the child safe, asking God to forgive what she had done if it was wrong, and asking God to watch over her mother if Grace could not come back. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, heavy and urgent. Then the iron door flew open with a harsh metallic scream, and Vincent Castellano walked in. Grace lifted her head to look at him, and the strange thing was she was not afraid. After everything that had happened after he had nearly choked her to death, she should have been shaking, she should have been begging, but she did not do those things. She simply looked at him with steady eyes, and the first question that left her lips was not about herself, not about her fate, but about the child she had risked her life to save. Is Sophia okay? Vincent stood there looking at the woman he had almost killed, the woman with bruises on her throat. Made by his own hand, the woman in cuffs locked away like a criminal. And the first thing she asked was about his daughter, not her own life, not her freedom, but Sophia, the child she had traded everything to save. Vincent's legs suddenly seemed to lose their strength. He dropped to his knees, kneecaps striking the cold concrete, and the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made an entire city tremble, was kneeling in front of a housekeeper with $47 in her pocket. "I am sorry," Vincent said, his voice shaking in a way he did not think he was still capable of. "I am so sorry." Grace stared at him, not understanding what was happening, and Vincent began to tell her about page 47, about Dr. Richard Harmon's report 5 years earlier, about how Harmon had seen the obstruction in Sophia's ear and recommended immediate removal, about the email Harmon had accidentally left in the file, the email that revealed they had deliberately not treated Sophia so they could keep bleeding. Vincent drive $50,000 a month for meaningless appointments, 5 years of his daughter kept in silence so they could keep getting rich. "I trusted them," Vincent said, his voice bitter and full of pain. "I spent millions on them. I took Sophia to the best hospitals. I hired the best doctors, and I believed they were doing everything they could. But you, a housekeeper with no medical license, no advanced equipment, nothing but a pair of tweezers and a flashlight, you saw what they deliberately ignored. You saved my daughter while they were draining me, and I almost killed you for it." Silence settled over the room, broken only by the bulb's faint flicker and Vincent's heavy breathing. Then Grace spoke, her voice hoarse because her throat still hurt. "I have a son," she said, her eyes fixed on empty space as if she were looking at a place far away. "Ethan, he was 4. He died 3 years ago in a car accident. He died in my arms. I held him and watched him go, and I could not do anything." Tears began to slide down Grace's cheeks, but she kept going. I did not save him. That pain follows me every day. But when I looked at Sophia, I saw Ethan. I saw those lonely eyes. I saw a pain no one wanted to see. And I could not leave her. I could not save my son, but I could not let Sophia suffer one more day, not when I could do something. Vincent Rose walked to Grace, unlocked the cuffs, and then he did something he had not done with anyone since Catalina died. He hugged her gently and carefully, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. An embrace that demanded nothing, holding only gratitude and respect. "Thank you," he whispered against Grace's ear. "Thank you for saving my daughter." Together they left. The cell climbed the stairs, stepped out of the dark, and went back to the hospital side by side. Two people broken by loss, one who had lost his wife and spent 8 years watching his daughter in silence, one who had lost her child and spent 3 years living with guilt. They had found each other in the dark, and maybe, just maybe, they could walk into the light together. Vincent and Grace stepped into Sophia's hospital room, and the sight in front of them made them both stop. Sophia sat on the spotless white bed, a pair of oversized headphones resting over her head, brought by a nurse. Her eyes squeezed shut, her whole small body swaying to a rhythm only she could hear. Her head tilted left, then right. Her shoulders lifted in tiny pulses, her hands on her thighs. Tapping time, and on her face was a smile Vincent had never seen in 8 years, the smile of a child drowning in the purest happiness. Sophia was listening to music for the first time in her life. A gentle classical piece, the nurse had chosen clear piano notes, and a drifting violin melody pouring into ears that had never known sound for 8 years. And she drank it in, drop by drop, like someone dying of thirst who has finally found a spring after years lost in the desert. Sophia opened her eyes, and when she saw Grace in the doorway, her blue eyes flared bright like 2 stars being lit. She yanked the headphones off, jumped from the hospital bed, without caring that the IV line was still taped to her hand, and launched into Grace's arms like a small bullet. Sophia clung to Grace as if she might disappear the moment she let go, as if she had waited her whole life for this. And from her throat came sounds still clumsy, but far clearer than they had been a few hours earlier. "Thank you," Sophia said, her voice still hoarse, but each word carrying the weight of 8 years of silence, just shattered. "Thank you, Grace." Grace dropped to her knees and hugged her, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her mouth holding the brightest smile she had ever worn, crying and laughing. At once pain and joy, braided together so tightly they could not be separated. "It is nothing, sweetheart," Grace whispered into Sophia's ear. "It is nothing, my little girl." Sophia let go of Grace and turned to her father, and Vincent stood there as if nailed to the floor, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to do anything that might break this moment. Sophia walked toward him, small steps over the cold hospital floor, until she stood directly in front of Vincent, lifting her face to the tall man she had called father for 8 years, but had never once been allowed to look in the eye. She raised her small hand and placed it on Vincent's chest, right over the place where his heart was beating like thunder beneath his expensive suit. Dad," Sophia said clearer than before, each syllable shaped slowly and carefully, as if she were holding each word in her palms. "Dad." Then she did something Vincent never expected. Sophia pressed her ear to her father's chest, closed her eyes and listened to the sound of his heart, beating the first sound of her father she had heard in 8 years. After a moment, she lifted her head again, blue eyes shimmering with tears, but the smile on her lips was the brightest the Castellano mansion had ever known. And she signed, boom, 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 boom. Your heart is beating so fast. Are you happy? Vincent could not hold himself together anymore. His legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees in front of his daughter, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight, as if she would vanish if he let go. And he cried for the first time in 8 years. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago cried without hiding it, tears pouring down his face, crying from joy, from regret, from all the years he had lost and could never take back 8 years. He had not dared look at his child because he was afraid of seeing Catalina 8 years. He had built walls around his heart and left his daughter to endure loneliness. 8 years he had paid millions to liars when what Sophia needed was only one person who truly saw her. I love you, Vincent, whispered his voice, breaking and shaking. I love you so much. I am sorry. I am sorry for all these years. I am sorry I was not there. I am sorry. Sophia held her father tight. No need to sign, no need for words. Only this embrace, only this moment, and the smile on her lips said everything her father was forgiven. Always forgiven, because he was her father and she loved him. Grace stood watching father and daughter holding each other, silent tears sliding down her cheeks, and she lifted her face toward the ceiling as if she could see through concrete and steel through clouds and sky, to a place where she believed Ethan was looking down at her. I did it, Ethan, Grace whispered inside her heart. I saved that little girl. I could not save you, but I saved Sophia. Can you be proud of me? And in that moment, Grace felt a small, warm embrace wrap around her from behind. Not real, not visible, but she felt it as if Ethan were here, smiling, telling her everything would be okay, that he was proud of her, that she had done well. Vincent rose one arm still around Sophia, his other hand wiping away tears, and he looked at Grace with an expression she had never seen on the cold mafia boss, the look of the deepest gratitude. Your mother, Vincent, said his voice steadier now, though it still trembled. She has cancer, right? Margaret Sullivan at St. Mary Nursing Home about to be transferred because you cannot afford the fees. Grace froze. He knew. He had looked into her. He knew everything. I transferred her to a VIP room in this hospital this morning, Vincent said. The best oncology team is caring for her. I will cover every cost for as long as she needs. Grace stared at him, her mouth opening but no words coming out, tears spilling again. And she could only stand there and cry, because for the first time in 3 years, she felt hope. You saved my daughter, Vincent said. This is the least I can do. And in that hospital room under cold white lights, 3 people broken by loss found healing in one another. Sometimes God does not send miracles through the finest hospitals or the most famous doctors in the world. He does not send miracles through costly medical machines or prestigious degrees framed on a wall. Sometimes he sends miracles through hands that have been broken but still choose to heal, through a heart that has been shattered but still has enough love left to give, through the most ordinary people carrying the most extraordinary faith. Grace Sullivan had no medical credentials, no modern equipment, nothing but a pair of tweezers, a flashlight, and a heart that still knew how to love after so much suffering. Yet she did what dozens of the world's top doctors, backed by millions of dollars, did not do, because she dared to see what others ignored, because she dared to act when everyone else stayed silent, because she dared to love when love was the most dangerous thing of all. A miracle is not found in money or power. A miracle lives in genuine care, in the courage to stop and look into the eyes of someone who is hurting, in the willingness to ask, "Are you okay?" and truly want the answer. The person who changes your life may not be a celebrated expert or a wealthy power broker. It may simply be an ordinary soul with a loving heart, someone brave enough to see you when the whole world turns away. 3 days after that fateful night, Dr. Richard Harmon was never seen again. No one knew where he went, and no one dared ask. As for Grace Sullivan, she never left the Castellano mansion, but this time she was not a housekeeper. She was family. She was the one Sophia spoke in her first true words. She was the one who brought light back to a home that had seemed doomed to sink into permanent darkness. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss more moving stories every day. Please leave a like to let us know you truly felt something from this story, and share this video with the people you love, the people who need to hear that miracles can come from the most unexpected places. Have you ever met someone like Grace in your life? Someone who saw you when no one else did? Someone who changed your life with a small act filled with love? Or have you been that person yourself, the one who dared to see what no one saw, the one who dared to act when everyone stayed silent? Share your story in the comments below. We truly want to hear what is inside your heart. And remember, you can become someone's miracle today. All you need is the courage to open your heart and the courage to care. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days filled with